With that particular scene, it was like almost too much. I had had the Candlelight Society, which is a satanic society, the cannibal priests, which were a competing satanic society, the pirates, black iron monks, all the stuff, which already felt to me like it was really gilding the lily, just larding this thing up with all kinds of fantastical nonsense. And now there's going to be an angel that inhabits a squid that flies through the air. It's like I'm jumping the shark. It was a kind of a fundamental moment in the not only in the construction of that story and the writing of that story, but in how I looked at myself as a writer. It's like if you go this far, then you've fully committed to this new road.
Hey, I'm Jon.
I'm Cory,
And this is The Passage,
the podcast where authors break down their favorite pieces of writing
taking you behind the scenes from the first spark of inspiration
to the final edits and everything in between. Jon, Nathan Ballingrud is without a doubt one of my favorite contemporary horror writers. I came across his work with his first collection of short stories, North American Lake Monsters. It was back in 2013, and I think I was just surfing Amazon for new books back when the site was actually good for that sort of thing. I'd never heard of Nathan or Small Beer Press before, but it was a cool cover and the blurbs made it sound interesting, and it actually turned out to be an all-time great impulse buy. The stories in that book have traditional horror elements and monsters. There's werewolves, there's vampires, there's zombies, but they're less the star of the show and more the seasoning on top. What really left a lasting impression for me was how deeply realized and human Nathan's characters are, despite their often many flaws, and how sympathetic as an author he is to them. I'm just one of many people who read that book and realized that they'd stumbled across something quite special. Nathan continues to play to those strengths in his writing, but since then, his work has definitely gotten weirder, in the best sense of the word. His next collection, Wounds, or the Atlas of Hell, depending on the edition that you have, is every bit as excellent, but it's quite different in ways that we're definitely going to discuss today. His novella, The Visible Filth, was turned into the 2019 movie Wounds. The stories from North American Lake Monsters were adapted into a Hulu original miniseries called Monsterland, and he continues to evolve and add to his award-winning bibliography. He's got a 1930s Mars-based novel, The Strange, and currently the Lunar Gothic trilogy of novellas, which starts with the irresistibly titled Crypt of the Moon Spider. So, Nathan, I am very excited to have you here on The Passage.
I'm thrilled that you have asked me to come on.
So you're going to read a bit from a novella called The Butcher's Table from your second short fiction collection. And the passage is a good ways into the story. So can you sketch out roughly what is going on and what people need to know leading up to the point that you're going to start reading from?
Yes, to give you a very rough sketch. It's a story about a person from a satanic cult who has hired a pirate ship to take him to the shores of hell. There are various factions. They all have their own reasons for going there, and they all come in conflict eventually. This passage is about... I apologize. My cats are fighting.
You're okay. The cats come first.
I'm going to keep the cats in.
Okay. Okay. So the factions, so to speak, in this novella are Clarion angels, which are essentially angels from heaven who feed on metaphysical objects that are not where they're supposed to be. And so they are chasing down this pirate ship for a particular reason. And one of the things that they do to get where they want to go is possess living entities in our world. And this is a scene in which they are possessing a giant squid. And so it begins like this. The angel spoke a word that fractured the jaw of its host, registering the pain as a curiosity. Upon hearing the word, one of the roosting angels took flight, rearing against the sun in a flare of black feathers, and plummeted into the sea, where it sank from sight like a corpse weighted with stones. The angel descended quickly, a dark feathered ball, until it passed beyond the reach of sunlight, and the water grew cold and black. It fell more deeply yet, oblivious to the atmospheres pressing against its body, its eyes pulling from the lightless fathoms, darting shapes, shifting mountains of flesh. It found a host, made a bloody gash and wriggled into it, and filled the beast with its holy spirit. Skin split in fissures along the length of its form, and it jetted forward with fresh purpose, its tentacles trailing in a tight formation behind it, its red, saucer-shaped eyes incandescent with hunger. A few pages pass, and we see this squid later on as it catches up with its quarry, and it lifts into the sky in this paragraph. It was a squid, a deep-sea monstrosity with tentacles nearly as long as the ship itself, and it was inverted in the sky. Its arms pulled the sails from their masts, yanked yard arms free of their moorings. People slid from the deck and into the churning water. The squid hovered in the air, its skin split lengthwise, revealing the white flesh of its interior, as though something within itself did not fit. Ragged black feathers jutted from the wounds. Its tentacles splayed in the air around it, a corona of horrors. Its glaring eyes smoked in the beating rain. And that's that.
I underlined and circled in my printed out version of that passage so many different sentences, but if we can kind of zero in on one sentence that I particularly like, it's at the very beginning of what you read. It spoke a word that fractured the jaw of its host, registering the pain as a curiosity. Can you tell me a little bit about how you came up with that sentence? It's such an unusual image, such an unusual kind of phrase. Do you remember where that came from?
Roughly. This story and two other stories in this collection all have to deal with like the language of hell and how it is a language. The very hearing it damages the person who hears it, gives brain tumors, starts bleeding in the ears, that kind of thing. And speaking it also does damage. I was infatuated with the idea of a language, the speaking of which breaks the body. It is so, antithetical to the human being that it's breaks the bones and it maybe rots the teeth, corrodes the tongue. I don't know.
What was the original idea for this story, Nathan?
Well, it was a phrase cannibal priest. I think a lot of writers probably have this where flecks of ideas will kind of circulate in the brain for a while. And that phrase was there. And it was, to me, a very pulpy, sort of fun phrase.
Cannibal priest?
Yeah. The Cannibal Priests of New England was originally the title of the story.
Okay.
And so it came out of that phrase. And I started thinking, who are they? What do they want? When in time are they? And I had already written a story called The Atlas of Hell, which was about artifacts from hell kind of coming into the world. That's where the language of hell first started really becoming an idea that I was playing with. And it occurred to me that this fit very neatly thematically with that story. I was really kind of embracing the pulp of it all. And so that's when, all of a sudden there were pirates, and it just kind of went from there.
Jon, it's such a bonkers story. Nathan's summary at the beginning really only scratches the surface of all of the different facets of it. So, Nathan, you had this idea. How long did it gestate?
Quite a while, which is pretty common for me. I'll have ideas sitting on the shelf in my head for sometimes years before I put pen to paper. And with this one, my original idea was to do it as a serial on a blog. I often give myself a challenge with stories, and with this one, originally anyway, it was not to plan. It was every week or so to just write off the cuff, as quickly and as unselfconsciously as I could. And I did it for not long, maybe 4 or 5 entries, which probably amounted to about 5,000 words or less.
Were they actually published? You had them up on a blog somewhere?
They were, yeah. They were on the blog. And then it started to get more complex in my mind. And all of a sudden I started thinking, well, this is more than just an exercise. This is a story that I care about this more than I thought that I would. And so I stopped doing it on the blog, and I let it sit for a while longer. I can't remember how long, but it's probably probably a year or so. And then once I was starting to put together the stories for the second collection, I needed a big one to finish it off with, and it was this. I knew it had to be this, and so I just hacked away at it for several more months until it was finally finished. And in doing so, I changed a lot of the things. I changed the title. I changed some of the conceits of the first draft because it was not only was it becoming a bigger story, but it was also augmenting another story in the book, and I wanted it to all to fit.
When you say it had to be this, can you explain a little bit the general concept of the second collection? And then can you explain why did it have to be this? Was it because it was such a good idea, you just had to get it out? Is it because it was fit so conceptually with some of the other stories? Is it because it was different or similar to some of the other stories in that collection?
A little bit of all of that. So the second collection is almost like the flip side of the coin to my first book. The first book was a series of stories very grounded in reality. It was realism forward, and the fantasy tended to be this kind of intrusion, and almost sometimes, as you mentioned earlier, a kind of background element. The fantasy was the thing that catalyzed the change in the character. And sometimes it was only present for a page or two in the story. And it was very restrained. And in the second book, once I started writing more stories after Lake Monsters was done, I just found I wasn't in the mood to write those kinds of stories anymore. I felt like that itch had been scratched. It was time to do something different. And I was also eager to have a little more fun. The stories in the first book were often kind of depressing to write.
They're intense.
Friends of mine or family would say, "Oh, can I have a copy of your book?" I'd give it to them, and I'd feel a little bad. This is gonna bum me out. But, I thought, would it be nice to give someone a book that I knew they might have fun with? And so I wanted to have fun in the second book. And so I veered towards the more fantastical, and it was more fantasy forward. But I still wanted to keep the attention to characterization and treat them as honestly as I did in the first book. Which leads to the second part of your question. The stories in the second book, a lot of them deal with the idea of hell. And the conceit for hell in the second book is that it is actually the source of love. Love is a product of hell, not of heaven in these stories. And so just playing with that idea and from various angles was the direction I was taking. And also wanting to have them be like compelling stories, not character studies, but some of them will like to have plots and some of them layered narratives, that kind of thing. And especially so with The Butcher's Table. And I felt it had to be this. One, I was in love with the idea at the moment, and it fit so neatly. It acted as a capstone to the collection. It had to be. It had to be there. It was the true ending for it.
You said that the challenge you gave to yourself was to write quickly and kind of unself-consciously. Is that not how you normally were writing at that point?
Not then or now. I'm a very slow, like, I'll wrestle over pages or sentences for a while.
Wrestling over what specifically?
Mostly events of the story. I'm not an outliner. I make it up as I go along. And that usually leads me into places where I'm just kind of stuck as to figuring out what's going to happen next. And it's not that I can't think of anything. It's I can think of four things, right? And they're all go in different directions and they all mean different things. So I have to think about, well, what comes after this? What's the best thing for the story? And I can get stuck, dealing with all the different possibilities for too long. And so the exercise was to avoid that problem by just running without knowing where I was going. But, I didn't stick with it.
Did you find it helpful as you were starting this story? Did it break any cycles that you found yourself typically getting into?
Yeah, I think it did. I think by at least charging ahead through the beginning, treating it like a pulp cereal, I was able to add in a lot of things, or not able, that's not the right phrase maybe, but I did so without worrying about later consequences. I just started throwing things in there. But that was only maybe for roughly 5,000 words of a 30,000 word story. So once it all started to get more shape in my head, and I knew that it was going to probably be the capstone for Wounds, then I slowed down and I went back to my standard approach, which is slow, but which works for me anyway. I want to be careful with it. The story was different, but it was because I think I was changing as a writer, not because the process I took was different.
In the acknowledgments of Wounds, and when we were going back and forth over email about which passage you were going to select, you said that you were a little hesitant, that maybe the idea of a carrion angel inhabiting a squid was too outrageous or too sort of over the top. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what was your hesitancy? Why were you originally a little tentative about going in that direction?
Well, it was because of North American lake monsters. Lake monsters had been well received, and that fed my ego. And therefore, I was afraid of doing something different. I wanted more of that, that positive feedback. This is one of the things I think trips up a lot of writers and tripped up myself, certainly, was the ego, was the notion of what will people say about this? What will they think about me? Will they not take me seriously anymore if I'm doing these pulp stories? Which at this point in my life, I look back and I think those are, silly questions, but they're the questions of a guy working on his second book, and who's still kind of like trying to figure out who he was as a writer. So yeah, I was nervous about a book full of satanic pirates and ghoul children, going to the fair. It felt like maybe I wasn't taking things as seriously I was in the first book. And that I had a nice first step with lake monsters, and the smart thing to do would be double down on that. Keep doing that. Do what they like that you do. Write novels like that. Um, you know, build a career that maybe you can get some success out of. It didn't escape my notice either that the success that came from Hollywood was based on stories that were the lake monster stories, or with the visible filth, a story very much in that vein. So I thought I was shooting myself in the foot, but I had no choice, which is sounds silly to say, but I tried writing more stories in that vein, and it was just so unpleasant. I tell people sometimes that writing The Visible Filth, which is the one that became the movie Wounds, was some of the least fun I've had writing a story ever, because I was done with Lake Monsters, and I had written one of the more pulpy stories called The Diabolist. And then so writing The Visible Filth felt like a step backwards. As a writer, I just don't want to do the same thing over and over again. It just feels dull. And if I'm bored, the reader's certainly going to be bored because I'm not going to do anything that has any life to it, I don't think. I think Visible Filth does have life to it, but I think I pulled the last out of that particular well.
Were you still hesitant after you'd written the stories and the book was done and it was ready to go to press? Were you hesitant about the reception, or once you had committed to the stories, did you feel, you know what, I was scared to go here, but I think I did a fantastic job, and I'm really excited to see what lovers of lake monsters think of this?
A little bit of both. I was definitely nervous about how it would be received, especially by people who really enjoyed lake monsters. But I believed in those stories, still do, and I think, in my own opinion, I think in many ways it's a better and more mature book than Lake Monsters is. But the flavor's so different, and I know that in this case, what's better than the other is really kind of a meaningless question. But the stories felt very satisfying. I wrote a story called Skull Pocket for that book, which it's one of the more polarizing stories that I've written, as far as readers' responses to me are anyway. But I adored it. It's like one of the closest I've come to like actually realizing what I meant to realize. You know what I mean? Lots of times you have an idea for a story and you write it. It's not quite what you had in mind, but it's maybe in the ballpark, one hopes. Skullpock was pretty close to what I had in mind. which felt satisfying. With The Butcher's Table, the schism in my mind was more intense with that story. Maybe because the ingredients were just so, in my mind, silly, pirates and satanic cults and what have you, and cannibals, of course. But so when I was not writing it, when I was, off doing other things, I would feel the sense of embarrassment about it. It was like, this is, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm making a mistake. But when I was sat down and I was writing it, I was just 110% committed. I loved being in the world. I loved writing the characters. I loved writing the dialogue. I loved writing it more than I've loved writing most other things. And that was obviously assigned to me. I would even think about it as I was working. It's like, half an hour ago, before I sat down, I was embarrassed by the story. Now that I'm in it, I'm fully committed. So I knew that was a good sign. I was able to recognize that the one was my insecurity and my fear of change. I've gotten more comfortable with it now.
Had you written in that mode before and you were coming back to it, or was it totally new for you to incorporate these more pulpy elements into your work?
I had actually, before I was writing for publication, like the Lake Monster stories, when
Mhm.
I was, learning how to write stories, all the juvenilia that will hopefully never see the light of day. I was more adventurous in the fantasy. I'd write weirder stuff. And even when I was a kid, my brother and I would take these legal pads and make like cartoons. We'd divide the pad into 4 blocks and we'd do cartoons, and there would be one pad would be one story, and I had a series, a couple series that would go on for 20 or 30 legal pads of these long stories, and they could get pretty bonkers. So yeah, when I was much younger, I did. I didn't even really put that together until you just asked that question.
Do you still have those legal pads?
Some of them, some of them.
Can you talk a little bit about the learning to write process? What did that look like for you?
Well, mimicking mostly, I guess. It was mimicking a lot of the readers, or excuse me, the writers that I was reading when I was younger, in my teens and my 20s. Of course, that was mostly Stephen King, Clive Barker in those days. I've wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid.
Mhm.
And I don't remember how that idea came about. Even in elementary school, I would write like little stories, and the teacher would have me read them to class. And I felt so proud of myself then, but I thought, man, what a little snot I must have seemed to the other kids. And so in my 20s, it occurred to me that, well, maybe I should, try to write some stories. So I would mimic what I was reading from, like I say, those writers or Omni magazine. There was a science fiction fantasy bookstore in Chapel Hill where I was going to college called Second Foundation. I would haunt that place and read a lot of Harlan Ellison and Frederick Pohl and Asimov and Bradbury. And so I would just try to do what they were doing. Didn't do it well, but no one does when you start, at least not many of us. And I just practiced over time. And then I went to Clarion Writers Workshop in the early 90s. I sold 2 stories immediately afterwards, my first 2 sales, and then stopped writing for several years because I just felt like I was in my early 20s, but I had been kind of sheltered in many ways. Didn't know a lot about the world, and it was at least smart enough to realize that. So I thought I didn't have anything really worth saying yet, so I waited until I felt like I did. And that's when I started writing the Leg Monster stories.
Looking back now, did you feel like that was true? You didn't have enough life experience, or you were right to wait? Or should you, looking back now, do you think I should have been writing this entire time?
Good question. I think I could have continued to sell stories, but I don't think they would have been memorable in many ways. Sometimes I think that that's not true. Sometimes I think I was selling myself short, and maybe I should have gone for it. But I have really kind of come to a place uh, where I just accept the kind of the rhythms and the patterns as they come, you know? I didn't, therefore I probably shouldn't have. You know, when I first started writing again, I started with You Go Where It Takes You, which is a story in Lake Monsters. And the effect of not having written before was coming out with a book that had a lot of potent stories, and that did very well for me. And I could have written maybe a book or two of short stories before that, but they probably would not have been very special. You know, they probably would have been fine, like magazine filler stories. And that's not the kind of writer I wanted to be or want to be now. So I'm quite comfortable with being slow, being methodical, knowing that I could write more and sell more. But you know, I'd rather be slow and really believe in what I'm doing, and be proud of what I'm doing than just become a machine.
What is your like writing process, actual process, kind of day to day, and how has that evolved over the years?
Well, I've gotten a little more disciplined over the years. For the Lake Monster stories, I pretty much wrote when inspiration struck me. Each story took the better part of a year to come out. And that's not because I was laboring over it every day for a year. It's because I would labor over it for a week or two, then put it down for several months and pick it up again. I've gotten better about keeping myself, if not on a daily schedule, then at least a more regular schedule. I tend to do the writing on the laptop in the mornings or in the afternoons on my days off. I try to do about 5 to 600 words when I per session, and I always tell myself that's going to be daily. It's never daily, unless unless there's a deadline coming, in which case I'm much more regular. When I get stuck or when I run out of whatever it is that I need to keep going, I find that it helps me considerably to put the laptop down and just take a pen and paper and just write there. When I'm typing, I can sometimes outrace my thoughts or out type my thoughts. It's the other way around when it's pen and paper. It forces me to slow down, and it also triggers that psychological mechanism by which you don't look at it as finished copy. When I'm typing something on the screen, it looks finished because it's in type. I know it's not, but it looks that way. When I'm writing something with pen and paper, it's my illegible scrawl. Of course, that's not finished. It's going to have to be retyped. So I have this freedom to be a little more reckless in the draft.
Do you remember any particularly challenging moments when you were writing The Butcher's Table? Or once you actually committed to telling a story that you were a little like, I don't even know if I should be writing this type of story to begin with, it went pretty smoothly and easily?
It did not go smoothly and easily, and most of them don't. It's the rare one that is easy. But the funny thing is, I don't remember a lot of particulars, and it's amazing to me because when I'm writing it, I can't think of ever possibly not stressing over these ideas and these questions. But once it's done, those questions just kind of like fade like a dream. I remember the struggle, but I don't remember what it was about specifically, except in the case of the passage that I read, with that particular scene, with the angel inhabiting the squid and rising up out of the water to menace the ship, the pirate ship, no less. It was like almost too much. I had, the Candlelight Society, which is a satanic society, the cannibal priests, which were a competing satanic society, the pirates, black iron monks, all the stuff, which already felt to me like it was really gilding the lily. It's like really just larding this thing up with all kinds of fantastical nonsense. And now there's going to be an angel that inhabits a squid that flies through the air. It's like I'm jumping the shark. It was a kind of a fundamental moment not only in the construction of that story and the writing of that story, but in how I looked at myself as a writer. It's like if you go this far, then you've fully committed to this new road. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. And I wrestled. I think I just sat kind of parked on that scene for quite a while, trying to figure myself out. Again, it's the ego getting in the way. I have come to believe during that time and since that the ego is the source of most of the problems a writer will come into. Once you put yourself out of the picture and stop thinking about what others are going to think, and just let the story be what it wants to be, just let it, tap into that flow and let it come, receive it instead of trying to wrestle it. It changes everything. It changed everything for me. And I think the trigger for me was thinking about Mike Mignola, whose Hellboy stories I'm a huge fan of. His other writing, other comics, I'm also a huge fan of. But I thought about how much happiness I got from reading those comics and how it was clear that he was getting a lot of joy out of writing them. And what he did was throw in everything. If he loved it, it was in the comic. Hellboy could be folk horror, it could be comedy, it could be, World War II era superheroes, could be Nazi guerrillas. All those things fit. And I was like, wow, how nice must it be to just write about the things you love all the time? And it was just that simple. I love the idea of an angel possessed squid, so it's going to go in there. The story wants it in there. If the people hate it and they think I've lost my mind, that's okay. It was a weird moment. And once I had gotten past that, the story continued to barrel along. And I felt very comfortable because the commitment had been made, in my mind. It was like, I have made the commitment and therefore we're going to go full hog on this thing. I think the story benefited from it. And I think it allowed me going forward to write more weird stuff like the Lunar Gothic novellas and just lean into the nonsense and embrace it.
What were you expecting from the reception of The Butcher's Table, and how would you characterize the reception?
I honestly had no idea what the reception would be. I knew that it was a good adventure story. I knew it was well paced, it was well written. I knew it had all the things in there that I loved. I knew if I read it, I'd have a good time with it. I also knew that I was doing what I wanted to do in all of these stories, which is not write cartoon characters. The situations might be, like 4-color comic panels, but the characters always want to treat just like I treated the characters in North America Lake Monsters. I've wanted to treat them as three-dimensional, psychologically viable human beings who were guided by the same insecurities and the same passions or angers that the characters in the realist stories were based on. The characters had to be psychologically real, even if the world they were in was a little more operatic. And I felt like I had done that in Butcher's Table. So I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that I was satisfied. And what has turned out to be the case, at least from when I hear from people, is that it's one of the most popular things I've written. I have more requests to go back to that setting and flesh out that world more than anything else I've ever written, which is really satisfying.
I know that you're on Reddit. I don't know how sporadically you are, but if you search The Butcher's Table into the horror lit subreddit, there's whole threads about it, it's curious as to how hesitant you were originally to even put it out there or to even commit to trying to write it.
It's funny because that's a lot, you hear that from people like filmmakers or writers or what have you, frequently. Like the thing they think is going to be a big dud is more popular than they thought it might be, and vice versa.
I was going to say the thing that they think will be the big hit is the thing nobody seems to care about.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't ever go to Reddit to look at that kind of thing. Years ago, I just sworn off looking at reviews, because one, bad reviews depress you, of course, and everyone focuses on the negative, but also good reviews are no good either. I don't think. I don't want to say no good. I mean, not good for you to read because you can let that stuff go to your head. And if you take the good reviews seriously, then why aren't you taking the bad reviews seriously? You should accept them both. And I think, especially in the age of social media, so not only reviews, but also just being in the social media world, I think there's a very high risk of writers trying to write to satisfy, the people they're hearing from all the time. I think that's a risky place to be as a writer, where you're going to cloud, what you're receiving with the clamor of the immediate world. You don't want to do that, or at least I don't. So I try to stay away from reviews. I try to stay away from Goodreads, Amazons, and I try to keep my social media engagement to a minimum too, because I don't know. I just want to keep the water as pure as I can. It sounds pretentious, but just my instinct.
Nathan, before we move on to rapid fire section of our podcast, I want to ask you the same question we ask all of our authors, which is if you could hear any author talk about their own process, similar to how we've asked you, dead or alive, who would that be?
Wow. Mervyn Peake. I'd love to hear about how Mervyn Peake wrote the Gormenghast books. What was, just, yeah, I'd just like to hear about that process, how those ideas developed, how he built upon them, what he felt about them. Yeah, it would be Peake.
All right, let's do some rapid fire. Nathan, the concept here is that we're going to ask you some questions in quick succession and just sort of give us your initial gut feeling, okay?
Okay, I'll try.
All right. What's one aspect of writing you think you're particularly good at?
Oh geez. Description.
What's one aspect of writing you think you're bad at?
Plot.
What's harder to write, the first line or the last line?
First line.
What's the first thing you edit out of a draft?
Excessive uses of the word that.
What's a word you always misspell and autocorrect saves you?
Oh God, there is one. What is it? Can't think of it anymore. It was rhythm for the longest time.
That's a hard one. Longhand, Word doc, Google Doc. What are you mostly working in?
Mostly I'm working on Scrivener.
Scrivener, okay. Even though you're not an outliner.
Even though I'm not an outliner, I like the way the scenes feel like discrete pieces. It just feels less overwhelming to me when I write. I was like, oh, I can write this little piece. That's not hard.
Yeah, gotcha.
How many titles did your last book go through before landing on the final?
Cathedral of the Drowned. 3, maybe 3 or 4.
You have one you want to share with us that was a close second or a favorite?
My favorite, which they didn't care for, was Sentimental Centipedes.
That is a great book title.
Who talked you out of that?
Publicity, the everyone. Marketing people were like, that's not going to be good for search engines.
Music, TV, podcasts, anything on in the background while you're working?
No, I like silence.
And finally, Nathan, what is your go-to procrastination method?
Reading. I will be struggling over a page and I'll look up and there's books all everywhere. So I'll just look at this for a few seconds. And there goes an hour.
That's not a bad way to procrastinate.
I mean, it's still procrastination.
Yeah.
It's not writing.
It's not writing.
Nathan, that's all the questions that we have for you. Thank you again for coming on the show. This has been a real treat to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nathan. It was great.
It was a lot of fun.